December 17th, 1944. A gray dawn drapes the Ardennes in frost and silence. Snow clings to the twisted branches of pines, crunching under the boots of the German advance. Columns of trucks and half-tracks wind through narrow forest roads, engines coughing smoke into the icy air. Confidence hums through the ranks. Reports from the front claim the Americans are retreating. Lieutenant Karl Richter squints through the mist, seeing empty foxholes and abandoned sandbags along the roadside. The forest seems deserted, quiet except for the occasional distant thud of artillery. The men exchange glances, cautious optimism shining through the grime on their faces. Victory, they think, is almost at hand. Yet, beneath the frozen soil, hidden by the stark white of winter, lies an unseen network of trenches, machine gun nests, and artillery positions. American forces, ordered to give ground deliberately, have left a carefully constructed illusion. Every step forward pulls the Germans deeper into a lethal embrace. And then it begins. A sharp crack splits the morning air. Bullets tear through the trees. Tanks roar from hidden hollows. The retreat that never was closes around them. Confidence freezes to panic. The Ardennes is about to remind them how deadly miscalculation can be. By late 1944, the tides of war had shifted decisively against Germany. The Allies had stormed through Normandy in June, breaking the Atlantic Wall and liberating much of France. German forces were in retreat on multiple fronts. Their industrial capacity strained, their manpower dwindling. They faced a relentless advance from both west and east. Yet, in Hitler's mind, a single bold stroke could reverse the tide. The Ardennes forest, a dense stretch of hills and pines spanning Belgium and Luxembourg, became the stage for that desperate gamble. Its thick woods and winding roads offered concealment and, Hitler believed, the element of surprise. The plan, codenamed Wacht am Rhein, aimed to punch a hole through the thinly defended American lines, seize Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace. Success depended on speed, coordination, and secrecy. The German High Command hoped that shock and audacity could compensate for dwindling resources. On the American side, winter had brought both hardship and adaptation. Infantry units were stretched across long, narrow lines, many soldiers exhausted from months of advance across France and Belgium. Supply lines struggled through the icy, snow-covered roads. Commanders faced the daunting task of holding a fragile front while also preparing for the possibility of counteroffensives. Intelligence had detected signs of German movement, but the dense forest and poor weather masked the true scale of the coming assault. The German attack began on December 16, 1944, at dawn. Nearly 200,000 men, supported by 1,000 tanks and assault guns, surged forward through the Ardennes. The Allies were caught off guard. Villages like Clairvaux and Bastogne quickly became focal points of resistance. German forces, accustomed to seeing retreat as weakness, misinterpreted the initial tactical withdrawals of U.S. units as evidence that the enemy was collapsing. Reports from forward scouts and intercepted radio messages painted an incomplete picture. Foxholes abandoned, artillery positions evacuated. For many German soldiers, this illusion confirmed long-held assumptions about the Americans. They crumble under pressure, thought many officers as their troops pushed through the snow-laden forests. Confidence surged through the ranks, reinforced by brief glimpses of seemingly empty roads and silent villages. Panzer columns moved with mechanical precision, infantry following, convinced the path ahead was clear. But the truth was far different. American forces, under commanders such as General Anthony McAuliffe and General Courtney Hodges, had orchestrated a deliberate deception. Infantry units had fallen back in measured stages, leaving traces that suggested disorder but preserved defensive potential. Roads and trails were cleared of obvious obstructions, only to funnel German troops toward pre-prepared kill zones. Artillery and anti-tank units lay in wait, camouflaged against the winter-white terrain, ready to strike when the Germans pressed forward. The Ardennes itself played a silent role in this unfolding drama. Narrow roads restricted movement, funneling mechanized units into choke points. Forested ridges and frozen ravines offered perfect cover for ambushes. Snow muffled sounds, but also made movement more treacherous, slowing reconnaissance and making visibility uncertain. Soldiers trudged through knee-deep snow, unaware that every step forward brought them closer to traps hidden beneath the white expanse. Morale on both sides was a fragile commodity. German troops, believing in a swift victory, carried hope and arrogance alike. American soldiers, meanwhile, endured harsh conditions, yet maintained a quiet discipline. Their withdrawals were not signs of weakness, but of calculated patience. A refusal to fight on unfavorable terms, preserving strength for decisive moments. Every empty foxhole, every abandoned roadblock, was part of a larger choreography of deception. The stage was now set. German units advanced under the impression that the Americans were retreating in disarray. Their overconfidence, coupled with the unforgiving winter terrain and the Americans' tactical cunning, would soon collide in violent and shocking ways. What appeared to be a simple advance through enemy territory was about to turn into a deadly trap, one that would test leadership, endurance, and the very limits of battlefield awareness. By December 18, 1944, the German advance had carved a wedge into the Ardennes, yet progress was uneven. Units moving through the dense forest faced narrow roads, icy slopes, and hidden obstacles. Among the most strategically important areas was Bastogne, a small Belgian town at the junction of 7 major roads. Control of Bastogne meant mobility for armored divisions and the ability to maintain supply lines for both attackers and defenders. American forces, numbering roughly 18,000 troops in and around Bastogne, faced immediate pressure. Surrounded, they held only sporadic artillery support and limited supplies, yet their leadership remained resolute. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, recently appointed to command the 101st Airborne Division, understood the psychological as well as tactical stakes. When German envoys demanded surrender, his now famous reply, simply "nuts," captured the defiance that would characterize American resistance. Further north, at Elsenborn Ridge, American defenders utilized the terrain to their advantage. Forested hills rose sharply from frozen river valleys, creating natural choke points. German reconnaissance reported what appeared to be gaps in the defensive line. Abandoned positions, empty roads, and scattered patrols. Panzer columns interpreted these signs as evidence of retreat. The 2nd Panzer Division, in particular, pressed forward with confidence, expecting minimal resistance. Yet, the reality was far from the Germans' assumptions. The American retreat was highly controlled. Infantry units fell back in prearranged stages, leaving behind deceptive signs of disorder. Hastily burned supply caches, abandoned helmets, and scattered personal effects. These subtle cues reinforced the German belief that the Americans were collapsing under pressure. Behind the illusion, hidden artillery and anti-tank emplacements waited, pre-registered on likely avenues of approach. Machine gun nests were carefully camouflaged within the forest, while tank destroyers crouched in ravines, ready to intercept armored thrusts. Communication played a critical role in this theater. American command maintained strict radio discipline to avoid revealing troop concentrations, while using brief, controlled bursts to suggest disorganization. German units, relying on intercepted transmissions and visual observations, interpreted the silence and calculated withdrawals as confirmation of retreat. Even experienced officers, accustomed to the rapid advances of the early war, were misled. Weather further amplified the deception. Blizzard conditions limited visibility and slowed forward reconnaissance. Snow and fog masked the layout of defensive positions while muffling distant gunfire. For German troops, The quiet roads and empty clearings seemed to signal weakness. For the Americans, the same conditions allowed units to reposition and prepare ambushes with minimal risk of discovery. Morale on the German side, initially high, was bolstered by early successes. Small villages fell quickly, resistance appeared minimal, and armored units pressed aggressively along constrained forest roads. Yet every step forward increased the risk. Narrow corridors, limited maneuver, and supply lines stretched thin in the freezing conditions. The very confidence that pushed them onward sowed the seeds of vulnerability. By the evening of December 18th, German units were well within range of the American traps. Bastogne and Elsenborn Ridge were no longer distant objectives. They were imminent tests of endurance, tactics, and leadership. Each misinterpreted signal, every empty road or abandoned position, was part of the Americans' carefully orchestrated ruse. What appeared to be a simple advance through retreating enemy lines was, in fact, a march into a meticulously prepared gauntlet. As night fell over the Ardennes, the forest seemed still, almost peaceful under the snow-laden branches. But beneath the frozen soil, beneath the apparent calm, deadly preparations waited. German overconfidence and American patience were about to collide with devastating effect. The stage was set for the trap to close, a moment that would leave both sides marked by the intensity and ingenuity of modern warfare. The Americans' tactical ingenuity was rooted in deliberate, calculated withdrawals. At first glance, the retreating units seemed to be in disarray. Foxholes abandoned, roads cleared, supply caches burned or hidden. To the Germans, it looked like a crumbling front, a prize ready to be seized. Yet every maneuver was intentional. By staging withdrawals in measured increments, commanders lured enemy forces into narrow corridors where artillery, machine guns, and anti-tank weapons awaited. Roads funneling through ravines became kill zones. Intersections like those at Bastogne and along Elsenborn Ridge were pre-registered for artillery fire. The deception relied on precision and discipline. Every abandoned position, every vacant roadblock, was carefully arranged to convey weakness while preserving defensive strength. The Germans, moving under the assumption that victory was near, were unknowingly marching into a trap meticulously designed to exploit overconfidence and terrain. On the ground, the psychological toll was immediate. German soldiers, accustomed to rapid advances in previous campaigns, felt anticipation and eagerness mixed with faint unease. Reports of empty American positions fueled optimism. For some, the advance felt almost too easy, an illusion amplified by fatigue, winter cold, and distance from command. Meanwhile, American troops endured freezing nights, hunger, and isolation, performing withdrawals under fire with grim determination. Their fear was tempered by training, discipline, and trust in leadership. In these moments, human emotion became a weapon. German overconfidence met American restraint, and each side's morale influenced the unfolding battle. Panic and hesitation, even among seasoned officers, could be induced simply by subtle cues. The frozen forest itself seemed alive with uncertainty. The Ardennes was more than a backdrop. It was a weapon in the hands of prepared defenders. Dense forests restricted armored movement, while frozen ravines and winding roads created natural choke points. American engineers had reinforced critical crossings and cleared routes to funnel attackers where artillery and tank destroyers could strike effectively. Communications technology played a role too. Disciplined radio silence and carefully controlled signals misled German intelligence. German units, attempting to coordinate attacks over limited lines in harsh winter conditions, often operated on incomplete information. Mechanized units pressed forward into constricted spaces, where the combination of terrain, camouflage, and hidden firepower amplified their vulnerability. Nature, technology, and tactical foresight intertwined to shape the battlefield before the first shots of the ambush were fired. Leadership shaped every facet of the engagement. On the American side, commanders like McAuliffe and Hodges recognized the psychological dimension of warfare, using calculated withdrawals not just to conserve forces, but to manipulate enemy expectations. Decisions were precise, timing critical. Too fast a retreat risked confusion. Too slow would expose troops to annihilation. On the German side, commanders faced their own pressures. Units like the 2nd Panzer and 12th SS, ordered to advance rapidly, operated under the illusion of collapsing opposition. Reports confirming empty positions reinforced preconceptions, guiding decisions that, while tactically sound under normal circumstances, ignored the possibility of deception. In both camps, leadership dictated not just strategy, but the tempo of fear, confidence, and anticipation, a reminder that in war, human judgment can be as decisive as firepower. From the German viewpoint, the Ardennes appeared to offer a rare opportunity. Early reports suggested American forces were retreating, foxholes abandoned, artillery silenced, villages deserted. Panzer commanders anticipated minimal resistance, envisioning a swift breakthrough that could destabilize the entire Allied front. Yet their interpretation was fatally incomplete. German intelligence relied heavily on visual observation and intercepted radio traffic, both of which were carefully manipulated by the Americans. The perceived retreat was not a sign of weakness, but of strategic patience. Every step forward, every column of tanks or marching infantry moved deeper into pre-selected kill zones. The Germans' confidence blinded them to subtle cues, camouflaged machine gun nests, anti-tank obstacles hidden in snowdrifts, and the quiet, deliberate repositioning of American units behind natural barriers. By the time the first volleys erupted, the illusion had already claimed the psychological advantage. War is not just movement of men and machines. It is a crucible of moral choices. American commanders faced the agonizing decision of pulling troops back under pressure, knowing that any misstep could lead to catastrophic casualties. They balanced the need for tactical deception against the risk to their own soldiers. For German officers, the choice to advance rested on incomplete information, driven by pride, doctrine, and the momentum of past victories. Both sides bore the burden of responsibility for lives in the balance. The Ardennes was a place where calculated patience clashed with expectation, where each command decision carried moral as well as tactical weight. When the trap was sprung, it was not just bullets and shells that inflicted damage, but misjudgments, assumptions, and the cruel calculus of survival under fire. Amid these large-scale maneuvers, individual soldiers influenced outcomes in subtle but critical ways. American troops tasked with staging withdrawals executed orders with precision, often improvising to maintain the illusion of panic. A single soldier might leave a spent cartridge conspicuously on a road, or abandon a helmet to suggest hurried retreat. German soldiers moving through the forest made snap decisions based on these cues. Which path to take, which clearing to cross, which hill to ascend. Small choices compounded, shaping the flow of the engagement. Individual initiative, whether in feigned disorder or aggressive probing, became a decisive factor in a battle, governed by deception and perception as much as by firepower. The Ardennes engagement illustrates a broader lesson in military strategy. Patience and calculated restraint can outweigh raw strength and momentum. The Americans' deliberate withdrawals preserved combat power while manipulating enemy perceptions. German forces, driven by urgency and expectation of easy victory, became entangled in a trap whose contours they could not fully discern. The encounter demonstrated the interplay between operational planning and human psychology, where the tempo of movement, the presentation of weakness, and the reading of the opponent determined success or failure. Strategic foresight transformed a simple withdrawal into a weapon, leaving the Germans exposed at precisely the moment they believed the enemy had vanished. By examining these angles, tactical deception, human psychology, terrain and technology, leadership, enemy misreading, moral weight, individual initiative, and strategy. The full complexity of the Ardennes trap emerges. It was not a simple ambush. It was a carefully orchestrated convergence of discipline, cunning, and circumstance. And all of it was about to reach its devastating climax. December 19, 1944. The forested roads of the Ardennes seemed deceptively quiet under a heavy gray sky. German columns, armored and confident, pushed deeper into the snow-choked terrain. Scouts reported empty villages, and officers, trusting these observations, ordered rapid advances. The 2nd Panzer Division led the charge, followed by infantry units eager to capitalize on what they believed was a collapsing American line. Every step forward reinforced their belief in imminent victory. Unseen, American troops lay in waiting. Anti-tank guns crouched behind snowbanks, pre-sighted on the narrow forest roads. Machine gun nests were hidden among dense thickets, their barrels pointing at anticipated enemy avenues of approach. Artillery units had been pre-positioned on ridges, their coordinates calculated for maximum effect. Each retreating American soldier had been positioned to reinforce the illusion, to guide the Germans deeper into the trap. The first volleys shattered the quiet. Artillery shells ripped through the columns, sending snow, splinters, and men flying. Tanks stalled in narrow ravines, vulnerable to hidden anti-tank weapons. Machine guns erupted from the forest edges, catching infantry in crossfire. The Germans had believed the Americans were weak. Now they faced a coordinated, lethal resistance that seemed to spring from every shadowed corner. Panic spread quickly. Officers shouted orders that were nearly impossible to execute in the confined, snowbound terrain. Radio communications became unreliable amid the chaos, compounded by misdirected movement and disoriented units. Some German squads attempted to push forward, only to be cut off by pre-registered artillery barrages. Others tried to retreat, but the narrow roads and hidden obstacles slowed movement, creating bottlenecks that intensified casualties. Amid the chaos, human reactions told a story of fear, confusion, and desperate improvisation. Soldiers who had expected an easy advance now ducked behind trees, returned fire from exposed positions, or surrendered under overwhelming odds. The forest itself seemed to close in on them, every tree, ravine, and hill contributing to a carefully orchestrated nightmare. Morale collapsed as the initial confidence turned to horror. The Americans maintained discipline despite the intensity of the engagement. Their counterfire was methodical, each unit aware of its role within the larger plan. Medics and communication runners navigated the chaos to relay orders and support troops, preserving cohesion in the midst of sudden, violent confrontation. Every pre-positioned artillery strike landed precisely on advancing German formations, demonstrating the lethal synergy between preparation, timing, and understanding of terrain. By midday, the consequences of the misjudgment were undeniable. Several German armored vehicles were destroyed or immobilized, infantry units were fragmented, and command structures strained under the weight of unexpected resistance. What had begun as a confident advance became a desperate struggle to survive. The trap had closed completely, transforming overconfidence into catastrophe. The engagement at Bastogne and Elsenborn Ridge highlighted the cost of misreading the enemy. Tactical patience, careful planning, and exploitation of terrain allowed a smaller, ostensibly retreating force to impose severe losses on a numerically and technologically superior opponent. The Germans had underestimated not only the Americans' capacity for deception but also the human resilience that underpinned their disciplined withdrawal. The stage was now set for the second phase of the climax, the full collapse of German momentum, intense firefights, and the tactical and psychological reversal that would define this segment of the Ardennes offensive. By the afternoon of December 19th, The Ardennes forest had transformed into a battlefield of chaos. German units, still reeling from the sudden and precise American fire, struggled to regroup. Narrow roads and frozen ravines compounded their difficulties. Tanks that had led the advance were now trapped between concealed anti-tank emplacements, their engines roaring futilely as gunners exploited every vulnerability. Infantry squads, separated from their commanders, attempted ad hoc defenses, but the forest offered no cover against coordinated artillery barrages. The Americans, disciplined and methodical, pressed their advantage. Counterattacks were launched from unexpected directions, exploiting gaps in the German columns. Mortar teams fired from concealed positions, and machine gun nests enfiladed the narrow roads. Each strike compounded confusion and casualties. German soldiers, who had anticipated minimal resistance, now faced a lethal combination of terrain, firepower, and strategy. The sense of being enveloped, surrounded by an enemy that had never truly retreated, created panic and disorientation. Command breakdowns further accelerated the collapse. Officers, cut off from radio communication or forced to issue orders under duress, struggled to maintain coordination. Some attempted to call for artillery support, only to discover that American counter-battery fire had suppressed German guns. Movement through the constricted forest roads was nearly impossible. Vehicles became bottlenecked, providing targets for American gunners. The Germans' own momentum. Initially their strength now became a liability, funneling troops into prearranged kill zones. In one particularly brutal engagement near a clearing south of Bastogne, a German panzer unit advanced under the assumption that the Americans had abandoned their positions. Artillery struck first, immobilizing vehicles and scattering crews. Machine guns opened from concealed ridges, mowing down exposed infantry. Soldiers scrambled for cover in snow and mud, but every attempt to advance or retreat was met with lethal precision. The illusion of retreat had fully transformed into a deadly reality. The psychological impact was immediate. Panic replaced confidence. Men who had entered the Ardennes with expectation of easy victories now fought for survival. Officers shouted orders that could not be executed. Units fragmented into smaller, isolated pockets. Casualties mounted, morale collapsed, and the Germans were forced to halt their advance. In some sectors, entire squads surrendered after encountering overwhelming resistance. The trap had achieved its full effect, a tactical and psychological reversal that demonstrated the deadly consequences of misjudging an opponent. By nightfall, the German advance was irreversibly stalled. The Americans, though exhausted and outnumbered in certain sectors, retained control of key positions. Bastogne remained in Allied hands, and Elsenborn Ridge continued to dominate approaches, denying the Germans critical avenues of movement. The Ardennes offensive, which had begun with the promise of a decisive breakthrough, now faced the stark reality of attrition and stalled momentum. This decisive moment underscored a fundamental lesson of warfare. Deception. Discipline and terrain could overcome superior numbers and mechanized power. German overconfidence, shaped by prior successes and misinterpreted intelligence, collided with methodical American planning. The retreat that lured them in was not surrender, but strategy, a deliberate act that exploited every misstep, hesitation, and assumption. The battlefield quieted under the fading winter light, but the echoes of the day's chaos lingered. The trap had closed, leaving German forces shattered and disoriented, while American troops prepared to consolidate their positions and prepare for the next phase of the counteroffensive. The aftermath of this engagement would have lasting consequences for morale, for strategy, and for the broader course of the Ardennes offensive. The morning after the ambush, the Ardennes forest was eerily quiet, blanketed in snow and the remnants of chaos. German forces, once confident in their rapid advance, were scattered, disorganized, and demoralized. Reports from the field painted a stark picture. Entire squads immobilized by artillery, armored vehicles abandoned in frozen ravines, and men trapped in crossfire. Casualty figures were staggering in proportion to the size of the engagement. The Americans, though outnumbered in certain sectors, had inflicted severe losses while preserving the integrity of their defensive lines. Bastogne remained under American control, its defenders having withstood repeated probes and assaults. General McAuliffe's 101st Airborne Division, though stretched thin, had executed their defensive plan flawlessly, transforming perceived weakness into a strategic advantage. Units stationed at Elsenborn Ridge had similarly succeeded in channeling German forces into prearranged kill zones, using terrain, artillery, and machine gun emplacements to maximum effect. The illusion of retreat had lured the Germans into positions from which escape was difficult and costly. German command was forced to confront the consequences of misjudgment. Operational reports highlighted the unexpected resilience of American troops and the lethal efficiency of their prepared defenses. Officers who had anticipated an easy breakthrough were now tasked with reorganizing shattered units under conditions of extreme stress. Supply lines, already stretched across difficult terrain, were disrupted further by destroyed vehicles and impassable roads. The Ardennes offensive, intended to deliver a swift, morale-boosting victory, had already suffered a critical blow. On the human level, the toll was visible in the faces of soldiers on both sides. American troops, exhausted by cold, hunger, and continuous engagement, bore the marks of winter warfare, but also a quiet resolve. For the Germans, the combination of disorientation, heavy losses, and the realization of being trapped eroded confidence and tested discipline. Even seasoned veterans were shaken by the sudden reversal. The forest they had entered with certainty had become a crucible of confusion and mortality. The ambush demonstrated the effective use of deception and terrain in modern warfare. By manipulating enemy perceptions, the Americans had turned retreat into a weapon, extracting maximum effect from limited resources. Each artillery strike, every concealed machine gun position, and the careful staging of withdrawals had contributed to a decisive, though initially invisible, victory. The Germans' advance was halted, their momentum broken, and the strategic initiative temporarily returned to the Allies. These outcomes had broader implications for the Ardennes offensive. The failure to anticipate the trap disrupted German timetables and weakened the cohesion of armored and infantry units. Forward momentum, so crucial to the plan's success, was lost in a matter of hours. Reports reaching the German High Command highlighted the dangers of overconfidence and the effective integration of tactical patience, discipline, and terrain exploitation. The forest itself, cold and silent, bore witness to the consequences of miscalculation. Snow-covered ravines and scarred trees marked the positions of the dead and wounded. Roads once thought empty now carried the evidence of a costly confrontation. Abandoned vehicles, spent shells, and scattered equipment. The psychological weight of the engagement lingered for German troops, shaping decisions and caution in subsequent operations. By December 20th, the scope of the Ardennes ambush became clear. German units that had pushed forward with confidence were now fragmented. Some were forced to retreat under heavy fire. Others were immobilized by destroyed vehicles or snow-blocked roads. Commanders at all levels faced difficult decisions, trying to re-establish cohesion in conditions that were increasingly chaotic. The initial belief in American retreat had led to overextension, creating vulnerability that the Allies had exploited with precision. The psychological impact on German troops was profound. Soldiers, who had anticipated a rapid advance, now confronted a combination of surprise, casualties, and the realization that their own assumptions had been fatally flawed. Morale, once buoyed by reports of retreating Americans, collapsed in pockets of panic and hesitation. Veteran units, seasoned in years of fighting across Europe, were forced to confront the limits of their judgment. The forest had turned from a corridor of opportunity into a trap, exacting both physical and mental tolls. For American forces, the engagement reinforced the value of discipline, coordination, and tactical patience. The carefully executed withdrawals had not only preserved combat power, but also inflicted disproportionate losses on a numerically superior enemy. Commanders noted the effectiveness of terrain exploitation, controlled deception, and pre-registered artillery positions. Soldiers, exhausted by relentless winter conditions, had nonetheless performed their roles with precision, proving that morale, leadership, and preparation could outweigh raw numbers and mechanized superiority. Strategically, the failed German advance slowed the overall timetable of the Ardennes offensive. Plans to break through to the Meuse River and seize Antwerp were compromised. Units that had expected to exploit a collapsing front found themselves stalled, vulnerable to counterattacks, and forced to reconsider operational priorities. The trap had not only inflicted immediate casualties, but also altered the larger dynamics of the offensive. German momentum, critical for the ambitious plan, had been halted, buying the Allies crucial time to regroup and reinforce key positions. The broader Allied command took note of the engagement as a case study in controlled withdrawal, deception, and terrain exploitation. The ability to transform a feigned retreat into a decisive tactical advantage illustrated the importance of planning, timing, and the psychological manipulation of the enemy. Reports from the field emphasized that warfare was as much about perception as force, and that careful orchestration could yield outsized results even in the harshest winter conditions. On a human level, survivors on both sides carried the memory of the day forward. For the Americans, it was a testament to resilience under fire and the power of disciplined execution. For the Germans, it became a stark reminder that assumptions, overconfidence, and misreading the enemy could have deadly consequences. The Ardennes had tested the limits of both strategy and human endurance, leaving lessons etched in snow, steel, and memory. As the snow continued to fall over the forested ridges, the stage was set for the final reflection. The battle had ended for now, but the lessons of patience, deception, and psychological warfare would resonate far beyond the Ardennes. The closing of the trap and the consequences it wrought marked not only a tactical turning point, but also a moment that would influence strategic thinking in the final months of the war. The Ardennes ambush stands as a striking testament to the interplay of strategy, psychology, and human endurance in modern warfare. What appeared to be a straightforward advance by confident German forces was, in reality, a carefully orchestrated American strategy. The illusion of retreat, executed with precision, transformed terrain, patience, and discipline into lethal weapons. It was a reminder that in war, perception can be as powerful as firepower, and overconfidence can be fatal. For the Germans, the E-tool experience revealed the dangers of assumptions and the limits of mechanized momentum when disconnected from accurate intelligence. Their advance, once a symbol of hope for reversal and victory, became a cautionary tale of vulnerability and misjudgment. The forested roads, frozen ravines, and snow-laden ridges became a crucible where arrogance met reality, and every misstep carried a human cost. For the Americans, the engagement highlighted the power of cohesion, planning, and ingenuity under pressure. Soldiers executing withdrawals under fire, commanders orchestrating deception, and artillery teams striking with deadly accuracy demonstrated that even in the harshest conditions, disciplined preparation could offset numerical or technological disadvantages. The Ardennes exemplified how strategic patience and psychological insight could redefine the battlefield. Beyond tactics and numbers, the ambush speaks to a more human dimension: the courage, fear, and resilience that define soldiers on both sides. The frozen forests bore witness not only to destruction, but to acts of improvisation, leadership, and determination. Each individual's choices, whether to advance, hold, or retreat, interwove with broader strategy, reminding us that warfare is as much about human will as it is about steel and explosives. In the larger sweep of history, the trap in the Ardennes became more than a single engagement. It was a moment that shaped the Battle of the Bulge and, by extension, the final phases of World War II in Western Europe. It illustrated enduring lessons, the perils of hubris, the utility of deception, and the profound impact of disciplined, thoughtful action under extreme circumstances. As snow fell softly over the forest, concealing the scars of battle, the Ardennes remained silent yet eloquent, a frozen witness to the consequences of overconfidence, the cunning of strategy, and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of war.